Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to a Shenmue Dojo video. Today's video is going to be looking at what Shenmue Anime Season 2 could cover should the green light ever, maybe never happen, but let's just see how we end up. So just a little bit of recap about the anime and bits and pieces around it before I dive into what I'm going to cover, which will be the story of Shenmue 3 and beyond essentially with this video. So Shenmue Anime Season 1 did pretty damn well, came out in 2022, had 13 episodes covering the story of Shenmue 1 and Shenmue 2. It had its own spin on it, had its own soundtrack, did its own things with the characters, gave some backstories, and was pretty well received on the whole by the Shenmue community. I'd probably argue about 80% of the community pretty much enjoyed it, got decent viewing figures over on Adult Swim, did pretty well on Crunchyroll as well, but unfortunately got canned. Now, I'm thinking of, if it hasn't been canned or gets greenlit for a second season, what can we cover in terms of the story? So let's dive in to Shenmue 3's story. So quite obviously, Shenmue Anime Season 2, and Jason DeMarco said this to me when I interviewed him a few years ago, would contain the story of Shenmue 3. He thought it would take around half a season to do this. So that's a reasonable amount of time. They did Shenmue 1 in about 5 episodes in Season 1 of the anime. So I could anticipate seeing Shenmue 3 being a similar sort of length, I guess. But what this will do, I think, is potentially streamline Shenmue 3 story into the anime rather, so that it improves that pacing and moves the story on probably a tiny bit quicker than the game did. Now, obviously, you could fill in some gaps here. Shenmue 3 is a game. The story content was light. I'm not going to go down that hole, but like you could cover things like a Welsh training Bailu village. You could better fill out Niaus and her motivations for starting the war within the Chiyu men, and also how she gains the trust of Shenhua and Niawu to essentially lead her off to then lure Ryo to the castle. You could also then look at potentially a bit more of Landi's backstory, flashbacks of around Zuming Zhao and their relationship and training together, and you could easily flesh out some side stories for Ren, Shenhua, and some of the other characters in Shenmue 3 probably didn't get the screen time that we would have wanted in the game. So things like Grandmaster Feng, Shilling are two characters that could really benefit from an anime, just filling them out a bit more, giving them a bit more depth, and linking things a lot better in terms of that story content. The reason Awao was in Bailu and Ryo turning up and his journey through there into Niawu, and potentially if you wanted to bring Baisha into it, you could potentially do that for a Shenmue 3 portion of the story, I guess, as well. It would be its own spin, no doubt. The anime in Season 1 had its own spin on the first 2 games, and I'd more than welcome that its own sort of take on things, because what it then does is separates them out from the anime to the game, and that is absolutely fine by me. So Shenmue 3 is quite easy to go ahead and do. Shenmue 4 and beyond is difficult. Now, basing off a 13 episode series like Shenmue the Animation Season 1, that would then leave us around 8 episodes to do Shenmue 4 and maybe some bits of Shenmue 5 if we were going to go that far down the line. I don't think you'd have to plan this out. But as we know, at this moment in time, and potentially however long this goes on for, Shenmue 4 isn't out yet. Shenmue 5 isn't out yet. So you're going into new territory in terms of story. So the anime is going to have to tread a very, very thin line here, because what it doesn't want to do, in my view at least, is tread too far into the game's territory, so that if the games do happen, it's essentially a complete rehash of what the anime's done. But likewise, it needs to have its own spin on things in terms of, can it deviate away from some of what the game may have planned, so that again it gives it its own individual identity. Now, some things are going to make sense in a Shenmue Anime Season 2 in terms of Shenmue 4 and beyond content. We know we're going to Shuzo, that's been confirmed, so that would be an absolute given in Season 2. We also know that we've got the Cliff Temple at the end of Shenmue 3, which is heavily intimated in the Project Berkeley stuff as well. So that seems to have quite a key importance to the Shenmue story going forward. So we know that element of things is going to be there. Looking at the chapter cards as well, then you've got further on, you've got sort of what looks to be a training arc for Ryo or Akira in the chapter tiles, and then you've got some key events as you lead towards the end of things. Now, is a 13 episode series enough to finish things? I don't know, and the reason I say that is when you look at the end of the season 1, the end of the Shenmue 2 portion, the Guilin section was rushed. It was pushed so quickly through that it actually lost some of the essence of it. Now, obviously, we don't know what the story content will be for Shenmue 4 and beyond, but at the same time, you don't want to rush things. You want to let it grow, which then may potentially go into a season 3. Now, with the difficulties without getting to season 2, a season 3 is equally going to be as difficult, most likely. But away from sort of mainline story things, you can then start filling out some of the other story arcs that may not get covered in the game. Now, the biggest one that jumps out for me here is Ewing and Zimming. Now, Yu Suzuki said to James and Switch back when they interviewed him last April into May, was that some of the story arcs and things that have been mentioned in the previous games may have to make way in order to progress Ryo's story forward in a Shenmue 4 and Shenmue 5. And he specifically mentioned Ewing and Zimming as part of that. Now, we all know that is a wonderful story arc. We have a good idea of where it's going. You've got the comics as well from Shenmue 2. And it's heavily intimated that there's going to be some sort of reunion between Ewing and Zimming at some point. Now, if the game can't cover it because of budgetary constraints or whatever, then that is definitely something a Season 2 could look to explore and dive into and just maybe tie up some of those loose ends that the games may not have the facility to do. I'm absolutely fine with something like that. It makes complete sense and it gives the anime its own identity. Likewise as well, you could then give it a different spin on the training arc. You could speed through some of that if you needed to. You could then maybe dive into a little bit more about Lan Di's past as you move through sort of the final bits of the story. You could also dive into the lore around Shenhua. Now in Shenmue 3, it's heavily intimated about her powers, and obviously it's Shenmue 2, you've got the whole prophecy thing as well. So in an anime season 2, going to Shenmue 4, Shenmue 5, you should look to explore, certainly in my opinion, her powers, the prophecy, and how it all comes together. For example, could you borrow inspiration from Shenmue Online and some of that magical stuff that was in those trailers back in the day as part of the anime experience and really sort of make it big and elaborate and sort of blow our minds a little bit? Possibly. But this is where I think it can forge its own identity away from the games potentially. We know everything's novelized, we know everything's there in terms of being written down, and we know the anime has a history of taking things that weren't in the games, like the karate tournament being one very, very specific example from season 1. It wasn't in the games, but they took it and borrowed it. So what's to say they couldn't take some events from the novel that aren't planned in the game and move that forward in terms of the presentation of the anime? As I said, I'm not sure you can do it in a second season and finish a story. That would be a big discussion to have and how you plan that out. But people far more knowledgeable than I will be able to work all of that out and discuss that at length. So, just to summarise a little bit, could the anime season 2 finish things? Yes, it absolutely could. Can it go beyond Shenmue 4? Yes, it absolutely could. And I do think it would be a very good way to finish things off if we're not going to get Shenmue in game form, because the anime was well received, the community liked it, and it's got a good basis there, I think, to push things forward if we need it to. And as I said in my previous video, it would be something that if I was in charge, I would be heavily exploring as an option, games or not, to get more Shenmue content out there to the community, to the people who want to consume that, and see whether we can get that finished. Now, I don't really want the anime to go ahead of the games, I must admit, but if it had to, and that was the way things had to go, then I would be behind it. Anyway, guys, that's enough talking from me. What do you think about Shenmue the Anime Season 2? Should it finish things? Can it finish things? And should it do it before the games? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget, for £2 a month, you can be a member, get all the video content ahead of time. Don't worry if you don't. Nothing's locked behind the paywall. You just get it on the scheduling system and everything goes to the running costs of the site. As I say at the end of every video, thank you to everybody who enjoys the content that we're putting out through the dojo and the various channels that we have. It's very much appreciated by James, myself, and all of the staff. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Just give us a subscribe as well while you remember to do that. And I'll be back with a video in the not too distant future. But for now, guys, take care. Have a good one.